Yes, ma'am.
Right. So let's start today's discussion. In the last class, we were talking about technical report, especially academic technical report and its components. And we have discussed about few of the components in technical report. So this is the list of components those we should have in our technical report. A cover page, summary or abstract of the project, then preface, dedication, which is optional document. Then we are having the certificates. So one certificate from the department having the signatures of various authorities, and if the project is sponsored, then you may have the certificate from the respective company who has sponsored that project. Further, we'll be having the acknowledgement page, then table of contents, list of figures, list of tables, glossary, or the abbreviations or acronyms. Then actual report starts from this point onwards. The introduction, literature survey, problem statement, objectives and scope, design and methodology, results and discussions, conclusion, references, bibliography and appendices. So in fact, we have discussed till this point introduction. So today we are going to cover the remaining components of our technical report. So let's once again go through the introduction chapter. So this is usually chapter number 1 in our report. In this chapter, we include the clear idea why we have come up with this particular project. What is the motivation behind the idea that we have explored in this project? Okay, then we should provide the brief background about the selected topic. It should identify the importance, its relevance, applications, and so on. So we may have the subsection under this chapter, and that is the background and context, wherein typically we provide the information that is required for the reader to understand rest of the document. We also provide significance of the topic, the need of the topic, how this topic is relevant, how this project is relevant with respect to the problem statement. Then we need to provide major constraints. So as I stated, major constraints are the limitations of our project. So if we are having any constraints, if we are having some points, those we have not considered in the project, we have not addressed in the project, then we should clearly mention these constraints. Mentioning the constraints in the introduction chapter itself is really makes sense, because if we are clearly providing the constraints of the projects, then the examiner or the reader may not raise any questions related to the areas those we have not addressed. Okay, so it is really very important to include major constraints. Also, we should include major contributions of the project. So what you have done, what is your major contribution, what is novelty of your work, that also we need to specify. Finally, in this chapter, we need to include the outline of the report, how the report is organized. So what has been mentioned in each chapter, that also needs to be clearly mentioned in this introduction chapter. So we have covered up to this point. Now let us move ahead with the second chapter in our report, and that is literature survey or literature review. In fact, while writing the project proposal, we have provided literature review. So we are going to use the same literature review, no doubt. So it is a summary of the relevant literature that is available on the project topic over a specified period of time. So usually we refer to the literature not older than last 5 years. So we refer to the literature, we refer to the articles, research papers. Those are published in past 5 years, right? Because that is actually giving us the state of the art about the topic. So we should search the published material, research papers, articles, website, blogs, existing applications if any. Also, we need to make sure that whatever resources we are using, those are authenticated. If we are referring to the papers or the periodicals or the articles, then these papers are peer reviewed, right? Then, and these are published by reputed publishers. So in fact, I have mentioned the list of publishers also who actually publish the research articles, and those are the reputed publishers. So we should refer to the papers published by IEEE, elsewhere, Springer, right? So these are the reputed publishers. Those are actually publishing the technical articles. So we should refer to the papers published by these publishers. Typically, if we refer to these publishers, go for the transaction or the journal papers, because these papers are full length papers and these papers provide the details. Those are used by these researchers, right, to come up with the solution to the problem. So these papers can provide us lots of insights as far as our implementation is considered. Okay, so refer to such kinds of papers. Then whenever we are referring to the material that is available, right, we should make sure that we are citing all the information, bibliographic information. Meaning, if we are referring to somebody else's work, then we should provide appropriate credit to that particular paper or that particular author, right, or that particular website, whatever we are referring to. So we should carefully and accurately cite all the bibliographic information. Then whenever we are writing the literature review, arranging the material in chronological order is a good idea. So if we are referring to the paper, say from 2015 onwards, then it is a good idea that we should follow the chronological order, right, with respect to the year of publication, so that we can understand how the progress with respect to that particular domain has taken place during last few years, right? So this is one important hint that we should follow. Also, we need to analyze the selected literature and we need to find out what are the advantages, what are the limitations of these methods. Okay, in fact, we had at length discussion about how to write literature review whenever we talked about project proposal, and also we have undergone the assignment in our tutorial sessions with respect to the literature review. Okay, but now what is the difference in writing the literature review for project proposal and for the project report? No doubt, whatever review of literature that we have carried out for project proposal, we are no doubt using that literature review, right? So we have already searched for, we have already studied the material, and then we propose the project. So that literature review is really relevant with respect to the project report also. But what happens usually is, as we move on implementing the project, then many times it happens that continuously we go on referring to the material available. Okay, so in due period it happens that we are finding new material, new literature. So in literature review of the project report, you should add the material that you have not cited in your project proposal and that you have found out later on during the implementation phase of your project, right? So if you have found out such relevant material, then you should include that literature, that material also in your literature review. Is that okay? Yes?
Yes, ma'am.
Right. Now, as I stated earlier and as we have exercised in our tutorial session also, we should provide a table showing the comparison of selected approaches or references. Okay. So see here, this is how we can prepare a table that compares the important approaches. So depending upon what kind of project you are working on, right, we should have such kind of a table. So this is the paper on year of publication. So this is the reference number that we are using here to cite that particular paper, right? And these references are listed in the section of references, and this is the year of publication. Okay, now we are having the column methodology, wherein we are listing out briefly what is the methodology that is being used in this paper. We are listing the limitations. We are talking about the data set also, which data set this paper has used, these researchers have used, and the performance reported by the researchers in this paper. Okay, likewise, whichever are the important references we have, we should come up with such kind of a comparative table of all those references. Okay, so that at a glance it would be possible for us to have a look, or the reader can understand to what extent we have researched the literature. The examiner will understand to what depth we have searched for the material, right? At a glance, the reader will identify whether we have used the recently published work. Okay, so at a glance, the reader or the examiner of our academic project will understand about the depth of our research, the extent to which we have studied the material. Okay, a good way to represent the literature review in a tabular form. Okay, now let us proceed with the third chapter in our report, and that is problem statement, objectives and scope. In fact, this chapter is similar to that of the project proposal. So already in our project proposal, we have defined the problem statement. Already in our project proposal, we have defined our objectives and scope, right? So you should use the same approved objectives to implement your project. There should not be any deviation in the objectives. So whichever objectives are approved through your project proposal, the same objectives you should include in your report, and the same objectives you should use to develop your project. Right? Now, the next chapter in our report is design and methodology. So this chapter is really very important. In project proposal also we had this chapter of methodology, but that was too brief. So in project proposal we describe the methodology very briefly without providing much details, right? So overall methodological description we provide in the project proposal, but whenever it comes to the project report, then we should include the detailed design of our project and the detailed methodology of our project, right? So this is comparatively the most lengthier chapter in your report. So you should describe, typically being computer science students, we usually deal with the software projects. Okay, so describe what a software system does. So you should provide the specifications and the design of your system. So describe what a software system does and how it does so. Right? So whatever system you are building, describe what it does and how it does. Right? So usually you should include more than one viewpoints. So what are the viewpoints? Those you should include in this chapter, right? While mentioning or while providing the details of your design. So you should refer to the viewpoints like the business model and the software support, the user interface, the dynamic behavior of the system, how data flows through the system. So you may come up with data flow diagrams. Okay, then what data types are implemented in the system? So you should focus upon that. What algorithms are implemented in the system? The static architecture of the system, that is how the code or the script is partitioned into various modules. So everything need to be precisely mentioned in our project report. I'll repeat once again: the business model, the software supports, the user interface, how it will look like, what are the functionalities those you are providing, the dynamic behavior of the system, so how your system behaves with respect to some changing events, how data flows through the system, right? Then what data types you are going to implement, what data sets you need to use, what algorithms are implemented in the system, what is the architecture of the system, how your code is being partitioned into different modules. So with respect to all those points, you need to mention the information in your design. Okay, you should include high level design. In fact, these points you might have learned in software engineering. Okay, so you should provide high level design. So what is high level design? Actually, it explains the architecture that is being used to develop the system, to develop the project, right? So whatever is the high level design, that is the overview of the system that you have developed, the architecture, overall block diagram of the system that you need to provide. Okay, so this architectural diagram actually provides the overview. It identifies the most important components. Those are developed by you to come up with this product or this project and its interfaces. Right? The high level design uses usually non-technical or mildly technical terms, right? So while providing the high level design, we are not going into much technical details. It is a superficial introduction to the system that we have designed, right? So high level design in terms of the block diagram only explains what are the important components, what are the important phases of your project that you have implemented, so that the administrators or the non-technical people can also understand the high level design. Okay. And this high level design actually applies to both software as well as hardware systems. So after providing the high level design, you should go with low level design. So in low level design, you should provide the component level design, right? So step by step detailed procedures you need to mention, right? So how you are going to design the data structures, what is the required software architecture, the source code, how you are going to measure the performance of the algorithms, everything in detail you need to provide here under low level design. Okay. Now, if your system, if your project requires some sort of database at the back end, okay, then you should come up with the database design also. So make use of diagrams, right? Make extensive use of diagrams such as the entity relationships diagrams, okay, the UML diagrams. You must have studied ER diagrams whenever you learned database systems, okay. You must have studied UML diagrams whenever you learned software engineering, okay, or object-oriented designing. So use all such kinds of modalities, all such kinds of diagrams, the charts, right? So that your document would be more clearer, your document would be more explanatory, right? So use appropriately the diagrams, all kinds of diagrams. Typically, the UML diagrams, Unified Modeling Language, UML diagrams. So this UML is a general purpose developmental and modeling language, right? So you must have learned this in software engineering, okay? Or you must have learned this, or you might be learning this under object-oriented modeling and design. Okay, so this UML is intended to provide a standard way to visualize the design of the system. So under this chapter, you should provide all such kinds of diagrams depicting the design of your project. Okay, so depending upon whatever is your project, whatever kinds of diagrams you will be using are different. If it is a database related project, then obviously you need to come up with a database design. And if you need to show database design, you need to model your database using entity relationship diagram. So you should provide entity relationship diagram initially. That will give the detailed view of what different entities you are using and what relationships you are having. Associated with entity relationship diagram, if you are making use of relational database system, then come up with the relational model of the database, right? So in design section, you should have all those details. So depending upon the problem, you use appropriate way to provide the design details. Is that okay? Yes?
Yes, ma'am.
Right. What next? So after design comes the methodology. Okay. So you have designed your system. Now the design needs to be realized. The design needs to be implemented actually. So as far as implementation is considered, you should come up with the appropriate methodology. So in this particular section of methodology, you should explain the experimental setup, the hardware and software resources, those you are using to implement your project. Right. Now in the design, you have provided the high level design using some block diagram. Now in methodology, explain each block diagram in detail, or each block of your high level design in detail. Right. Then detailed theoretical descriptions you should provide. If any mathematical treatment is required, then provide all those mathematical expressions. Right? Write the algorithms, those you are making use of. So mention clearly algorithms. You may provide here the pseudocodes. So algorithms can be written in the form of pseudocodes in this section of methodology. So detailed description about the algorithms need to be provided. If you need to undergo some mathematical treatment, then that also need to be mentioned. Any mathematical expressions, those you need to implement, explain everything. Right? Then the data sets used and the method of data collection need to be provided. Right? After building your system, how you are going to check, how you are going to assess the performance of your solution, performance of your system, how you are going to evaluate the performance of your system, that also needs to be mentioned. Right? So this chapter, actually design and methodology, is providing all the important details about your project. So the high level design, low level design, the diagrammatic representations at various levels, and then the methodology, detailed methodology, how you are going to implement it. Everything needs to be included. Is that clear? Yes?
Yes, ma'am.
Right. So let me give you one example, or rather I'll show you one example. So I hope my screen is visible.
Yes, ma'am.
Right. So this is one sample report. So I'll be showing you the methodology part of this report so that you can understand how we can write the methodology. Right. See here, in methodology, the description about data set is given. Okay, so whichever are the data sets, those are used. So references are also provided, meaning in the references list, we are providing from where to download this data set or where this data set is available. Okay, then the detailed information about the data set, we are having here a tabular form of that. Okay, then it depends upon whatever project you have, not necessarily exactly same thing you are having. Okay, then different use cases are also mentioned. Okay, now under methodology, see here a block diagram. So this is a block diagram that actually reflects the overall process that is implemented. Okay, now please remember, whenever you are having any figure, any table in your report, do not forget to refer to that figure in your text. What does this mean? You are having this figure, right? So you have provided some figure number, some caption to the figure. Okay. Now, this figure need to be referred somewhere in the text. Say for example, we are having here a statement like the block diagram of the lip reading system is shown in figure 4.3.1. Meaning, whenever the reader is reading the document, the reader should understand at what point we should refer to, or we should see, we should read that particular figure that has been provided. Okay, so every figure should have associated number, figure number, and the caption, and every figure should be referred in the respective text in your report. Are you getting me?
Yes, ma'am.
Right. Now, see here, this is one more block diagram. So once again, the figure number is there, caption is there, and this figure is also being referred here. So to obtain the desired frames to be processed for feature extraction, the steps as shown in figure are followed. So we have referred to this particular figure in the text. So do not forget to refer to each figure through the text. If there is a table, then table also need to be referred. So we had one table, I'll show you. So this is a table. Okay, so this table is also being referred in the text. The words and phrases available in the data set are listed in the table and the table number. So table with table number is also referred. Now please remember, the table captions are above the table. Table captions, captions or the titles for the table are above the table. Okay, whereas the captions for the figures are below the figures. So this is the caption for the figure. So figure number and caption is provided below the figure. Whereas if it is a table, then the table title and the table number is provided above the table. Any doubt so far?
No, ma'am.
Right. So this is how we are providing the detailed methodology. Okay. So see here. This is one block diagram. Okay. So in this block diagram, only the important steps are shown. So what is the input that is mentioned? What is the output that is mentioned for this particular phase of the project? Okay, so in between input and output, there are different steps. Those need to be implemented. Now, see here, what is the input? It is mentioned. Now, the next step is extracting the keyframes. So with respect to this block of this block diagram, we are having one subsection, extraction of keyframes. So every block need to be explained. So to extract the keyframes, what needs to be done? What is the procedure? What is the algorithm that is being implemented? Detection of facial landmarks. So we are having this subsection, detection of facial landmarks. So how to detect the facial landmarks? The detailed algorithm, the detailed procedure is mentioned. Then the next block, localization of mouth. Right? So how to do that? That is also mentioned. Okay, so every block in the block diagram need to be listed and need to be, or the detailed procedure with respect to every block need to be provided. Okay, now implementation of CNN and LSTM. So block diagram, the architecture of CNN, everything need to be described in details. Right, so this is related to feature extraction. See here, figure number and caption is provided. Every figure is referred in the text. Okay, so this is how the detailed description, detailed methodology, algorithms need to be provided. Okay, now see here how the performance will be analyzed, how the performance of the system will be evaluated. Something is written related to performance analysis of the system. Okay, so every detail related to the methodology that you have implemented should be provided in your project report. Okay, see here hardware and software systems or resources required. That is also mentioned. The experimental setup, the frameworks used, that is also mentioned. Okay, so this is how we should write the methodology. You might have one question. In the report that I have showed, there was no use of UML diagrams or the database ER diagrams. And the reason is, with respect to this project for which the report that I showed you, that was the research oriented project. Okay, and the database is not required for that project. It is typically the computer vision based system that uses the deep learning approach. Okay, so there is no need of having any kind of a database. So there is no database design provided. Okay, typically the UML diagrams and all need to be provided in the projects wherein you are solving some problem and you are providing some software solution. Maybe if you are providing some, or if you are coming up with a project that deals with some application like mobile application, some web application, right? Some database application, the web application which includes some database at the back end. If you are working with such kinds of projects, then definitely you should provide all such kinds of diagrams like data flow diagram, the entity relationship diagram, the UML diagram, and so on. If the project is the research oriented project, then usually there is no need to provide such kinds of diagrams because those are not applicable at that problem statement. Okay, so whatever is relevant, whatever is applicable, you should use that. So if you are building some web application, some mobile application, some database application, then definitely you need to go for all these kinds of UML and database related diagrams. Right. So now the next chapter in your project report is the results and discussion. So this chapter is also really very important. So in this chapter, what you should include? In fact, now you have implemented your system, right? You have experimented with your system and you are now having the results. You are now having the outcome with you. So in this results and discussion chapter, you should provide your observations, your results, your outcome of the system. Right. So you may provide the sets of experiments. So these sets of experiments are formed by varying some experimental parameters. So if this particular parameter is changed, and once again if you experimented with the system, then whatever are the results. So every observation, all the results need to be documented in this chapter. Okay, If it is a web-based application or if it is some database application, then you need to, under results section, you need to talk about all the test cases that you have used. So usually you should come up with the test cases. Various test cases to test your project. Right? So whenever you are using the test case, whatever is the result, whatever is the outcome that you have achieved, that you need to mention in this chapter. Right? So how many test cases you are using? If any test case is failed, then why it is failed? What is the problem in the design? That you need to identify, that you need to comment upon. Right? If any test case failed, then how appropriately you changed your algorithm or how appropriately you changed your code, that also you can write in this chapter, results and discussion. Right? So you should talk about the test cases. You should talk about various experiments, those you are performing. You should talk about the observations, results, outcomes of your experiments. Okay, now while providing the results, you may refer to the respective methodology that you have listed in the earlier chapter. Meaning, under methodology chapter, you have provided the detailed algorithm. Okay, so whatever is, and in results what you are doing, you have implemented that algorithm. Okay, so whatever is the result, after executing or implementing that algorithm, that result you are providing in result section. So you may refer to the algorithm listed in the methodology chapter, and with reference to that algorithm, you may provide the result. So the reader, whoever is reading this project report, the reader who is going through the result, if the reader once again wants to know what was the algorithm, then if you are referring to that particular section from the methodology chapter, then it would be easier for the reader to go back to that particular section, read the algorithm and come back again to maintain the link between the result and the methodology or the algorithm. I'll show you the example for this, right? So there should be always a good flow. A good flow should be maintained throughout the document, throughout the report. The reader should not feel disconnected, right? Or the reader should not feel that there are some patches, those are assembled together and the report is prepared. No, there should be a systematic way in presenting all the data. There should be a proper flow maintained between the chapters. Okay. Now, analysis of the result also need to be mentioned. Also, the critical comments about the results should be provided. Typically, whenever you are having some research oriented project, then typically you are having lots of such comments or lots of analysis of your results. Even though it is not research oriented topic, you are working with several test cases. As I mentioned, if any of the test case is failed, then you should critically analyze why, what is the reason why this test case has failed. Okay, that is called as analysis of the result. So after analyzing the results, after analyzing all the test cases, you should provide the comments about your results. Okay. Reasoning behind the tests to evaluate your results should be provided. Just I mentioned why it happened. The reasoning behind need to be provided. Then typically you should use the charts or the bar graphs or the line graphs to depict the performance of the developed system. So whatever may be the system that you are building, right? Whatever are the performance metrics those you are using, you should come up with some pictorial way to represent the performance of your system. You may use some charts, graphs, right, to show the performance of your system. I'll demonstrate you how actually we should do that. Okay. Then describe how you compare the performance of your algorithm to other algorithms to indicate better performance, and why your approach is better than the approach that was previously available. So always there should be some benchmarking. So you need to compare your system, compare your results with the results those were reported by some other researchers, the results reported by some other systems. Always have a comparison of performance. So how your algorithm works and how the algorithm that was implemented previously by somebody else works. So have a comparison and try to show how your work, how your system is performing better than the earlier one. Sometimes it may happen that you may come up with the results less than, or the performance which is poor than the work that was reported earlier. No worries here also. Even though the performance is not up to the mark, if you have got the insight what is wrong in the design, then that will also count. I'll repeat, even though if it happens that the performance of your system is not up to the mark, the performance of your system is comparatively less than the existing system, then also it is okay to some extent. Why? If you could critically comment upon the design that led to the poor performance, then it is accepted that you have pointed out what should not be done. Are you getting me? So sometimes it is also accepted even though your algorithm is not performing well, because in that situation you have got the insight why it is not performing well, what is the problem in the design, and if you come up with such insight, then that information may be helpful for others, so that nobody else can go with such kind of a thinking, nobody else will go with such kind of a design. So that is also accepted. So many times what happens is, what you people do under this chapter results and discussions, what you do, you take the snapshot of your screen, whatever is the output, and simply you paste it in this section as a result. But that is really not a good idea. So only providing the snapshots of the results those you have obtained in this section is really not a good idea. Right? You should critically comment upon that. So you should come up with the test cases And along with those test cases, whatever are the results, you should report those results along with the discussion, along with the comments, along with the analysis. Right? So this is how you should write the results and discussion chapter. The last chapter in our report is conclusions. Right? So it actually sums up the key points of your entire discussion in the report. This chapter should summarize the essential features of your design. This chapter should summarize the significant outcomes of your work. Typically, in conclusion, you should provide the solutions with respect to every objective that you have defined. Your project gets assessed based upon to what extent you have achieved your objectives, right? So you have listed your objectives initially. Then you have implemented the project to achieve those objectives, right? So in this conclusion chapter, you should write one paragraph with respect to each objective. So whatever is the first objective, how you have achieved that objective briefly, you should mention in the conclusion. So if you are having 4 objectives, then how these 4 objectives you have achieved and whatever is the performance of your system, briefly you need to touch upon all the achievements with respect to the objectives, right? And that forms the conclusion of your project, right? So it should be written to relate directly to the objectives of the project. As I mentioned, typically write one paragraph for one objective in the same sequence and be precise in writing. You are not supposed to write lots of things, how you have achieved that objective. Only summarize whatever you have done to achieve that objective. Then highlight the significance or the usefulness of your work. How useful your project is, how useful your software is. You need to highlight that. Further, you should acknowledge the limitations, if any, and you should recommend some details as future work, right? So in this particular chapter, you can also include one subsection, and that is the future work. So there is always the scope to improve and extend your work, always, right? So there is a scope to add some new functionalities, to extend the work, to improve the performance, likewise, right? So that might be listed as the future work. So express your unrealized ideas. Unrealized ideas. What does this mean? During the process, you may come up with few new ideas, those you have not listed and those you have not implemented, but that can be implemented. So express such unrealized ideas in these sections. Those can be realized later. So a good future work section should provide a starting point for someone else to continue the same work. So many times it happens that whenever we read a research paper, we look at the future work. So future work would be the start point for our work. So somebody has worked on that topic, somebody has come up with some initial results, and that person has recommended some work that would be the future work that can be extended further. in this particular area. So if you are writing such a good future work section, then one should get the insight, one should get the starting point to continue the work, right? So this is how you should write the future work. Okay, finally the references section and few more sections are yet remained. So in the next class I'll be discussing about the references, bibliography and appendices. These three sections are yet remained. Okay, and also I'll be providing you with some detailed insights how we should write the report with the examples. Okay, so let's conclude today. I hope you have got the insight about how to write the project report. So let's conclude today. Thank you.